Welcome to the Airline Pilot Podcast. I'm Jason Ambrosi. We're coming to you from the 69th ALPA Air Safety Forum as part of a series of episodes we recorded here featuring industry leaders and experts on safety and security across our industry. One of the keys to improving air safety is the way we work to understand the factors that lead to accidents and learn from them. We have made countless advancements in technology, regulations, and procedures to prevent similar accidents from happening multiple times. Our ability and willingness to learn and adapt are what make aviation the safest form of transportation in the United States and Canada, and that includes learning from investigations. ALPA strives to play an active role in investigations, lending our own expertise on the front lines in airline operations. Most MECs have their own accident investigators, coupled with a national team of pilot volunteers and staff, and we conduct regular accident investigation training for our members to ensure they understand the process and are valuable members of any investigation. In both Canada and the U.S., accident investigations are performed by independent agencies, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada and the National Transportation Safety Board in the U.S. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Yoan, the chair of the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. Thank you for joining me, Chair Marier.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
To start off, can you tell us about your background and what led you to becoming the chair of the TSB?
Yeah, for sure. So I started training as a pilot in the early 2000s. Back then, the employment perspectives for a young pilot like me were limited, but I was one of the lucky ones. I was able to find a job almost immediately after my training in the Montreal area. So I worked on small aircrafts, doing mostly traffic surveys around the Montreal area on the TV and radio stations. So I managed to build up my hours quite a bit doing that. But at some point, I started seeing a slowdown in the work that we were doing, and I took one of the hardest decisions I ever took, which was to put my aviation career on hold and go work in the Canadian Public Service. And so in the more than 10 years that followed, I worked for multiple federal departments. I worked at the Canadian Border Services Agency. I worked with Transport Canada, which is the Department of Transport in the transportation of dangerous goods for the air, marine, and rail mode. And then the Social Security Tribunal as an administrative judge and then a vice chair. And I was appointed to the TSB in 2020 as a board member initially, and then as chair in 2024 when my predecessor retired. So basically, in summary, my background is, it's all over the place. It's very diversified. In the job that I do, I think it's essential because, of course, I need to know transportation for sure, litigation, access to justice, change management, and also how the industry works. They're all things that I have to be comfortable with doing my job.
Well, it's great that you're a pilot and you used to fly commercially, so you have that perspective to bring to this job. How does that impact the way you manage the TSB's approach to these investigations?
For sure, it gives me great insight as to how the industry works, what the challenges are, how things are working on the ground, but maybe more importantly, where we can put our collective efforts. And when I say collective, my organization's efforts, myself and the board's efforts to get the best safety payoff. So I have a good perspective on that. All of the TSB investigations, whether they are rail, marine, pipeline, and air, they all start the same way. We don't do air investigations differently than the others. And it's really at the last step when the investigation concludes and the report gets on my desk and on the board's desk that we review the reports with our own expertise. So I have my expertise, but my colleagues at the board also, we have someone specialized in the marine world, someone specialized in the rail world, and everybody brings their own perspective. So even if I review a rail report, I'm not a rail person, I bring my perspective into that report with outside eyes. So that's how we're able to get the best and most balanced reports possible.
Yeah, the diverse backgrounds help get to better conclusions for sure. So I know here in the States, the ALPA worked for decades to separate the NTSB and its predecessors from the bodies that actually regulate aviation safety. How is the TSB structured to preserve your independence from political pressures, regulators, industry, and so on?
So, well, independence is one of our core principles. It's how we are able to manage doing great balanced investigations that have an impact on safety. It's that we are able to, when it's justified, criticize the lack of action in certain parts of the industry without having a fear of a reprisal. And externally, we don't even report to the Minister of Transport. We report to another minister that has a portfolio that is not related at all to transportation. And this is to preserve our independence. So we don't have any relationship whatsoever with the Minister of Transport in Canada. So that's one key aspect of our independence. and the other aspect is internal. So basically, the investigations themselves are conducted by a director of investigation. We have one for each mode. And it's this group that does the investigation without the board's input. So the board is completely separated from this process. So the investigation is conducted by our investigators. And once they have collected data, once they have done their analysis, they present their conclusions to the board, which is myself and the 4 other board members. And then we review the report, make sure it's solid, make sure we have all the evidence, and then we draft findings and make recommendations. So we really review the conclusions of the investigation from an outside perspective to make sure that all our findings are supported, that there's strong evidence behind them, and that we have the best recommendations possible.
With the folks that we have here, we have almost 800 people here at the Air Safety Forum. A lot of them have the background in safety and understand the investigatory process, but many of our listeners have never even done any of this stuff. So can you walk through the process of a typical investigation briefly?
For sure. So the first part is the data collection phase. It's often the part that you see in the TV series and things that, and media that try to picture the work that we do. It's basically our investigators getting out there in the field, seeing the wreckage, talking to the witnesses, and collecting all the data. It's also one of the shortest phases. Usually, a deployment to an occurrence site and the follow-up interviews will take a few days. Rarely takes more than that. And then once the data collection, the field phase is done, we jump into the analysis phase, which is usually the longest phase, because this is where, for instance, we'll have discussions with manufacturers to be able to understand how their parts failed. It's also where we'll do a drill down. That's an internal term, basically to analyze all of the events that had an impact on the safety and try to explain why that happened. And then we ask why, until we can't ask it anymore. And that leaves us with an underlying condition. And then we analyze the defenses and why they failed in that case. By doing that, by analyzing the underlying condition, the defenses, that leaves us with a safety deficiency. And with that safety deficiency, we can draft findings and we can identify what can be done to prevent the occurrence from happening, again, with recommendations. And then there's the report writing, which is the part where we put everything to paper, make it look nice, translate it, because in Canada it has to be English and French. It's also where there's going to be a review by designated reviewers. So the designated reviewers are parties that have a direct interest in the board's finding. And so these designated reviewers will get a copy of the report at the initial draft stage, and they'll be able to provide comments on that draft report. When we get the comments, we'll look at them, we'll address the comments as required. Sometimes we'll make modifications to the report to address the comments. And then once all of that is done, the board will give our final stamp of approval to the report, and it gets published.
That's good. That's very detailed. I've been north of the border up there, and man, you can have some harsh conditions up there, especially in the winter. So how does that affect the TSB's work in the types of accidents and incidents that you have to investigate?
There's the harsh part, but there's also the remote part. And these are two different things. Right. And harsh climate, you probably saw some of the pictures that we posted back in February when we had this occurrence in Pearson Airport, where the aircraft turned upside down on landing, and our investigators worked on the tarmac for hours at a time at minus 15 Celsius with very strong winds. It was a difficult time working in these conditions for long periods of time, examining wreckage and all that. So there's this part of the job that is hard, but also the remoteness, because we have a lot of operations that take place up north in the country. And when an occurrence happens there, sometimes just getting there is difficult for us. It can be a logistical nightmare, getting our investigators there to the site to be able to do their job.
Right.
So it creates a number of challenges in terms of workplace safety, because we have to make sure that our investigators, when they travel to these locations, they are equipped with what they need to do their job, and they're going to be able to get back safely.
Yeah, probably makes it worse when it's remote and the climate is tough,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
But it's worthwhile because a number of our key recommendations stem from investigations that we have done in these conditions. we issued recommendations related to de-icing for some northern airports that was related to a tragic accident involving an ATR aircraft. And so we issued recommendations related to de-icing. We also issued recommendations regarding helicopter operations north of the tree line. So basically where there are no trees anymore in the Arctic. So references to the ground are very limited.
Yeah.
So we issued recommendations to try to address these deficiencies. So we have a lot of the key work that we do takes place in these conditions.
Wow. Interesting for sure. As at ALPA, we always request to support investigations that involve our members, or that we can lend our hands on expertise in that investigation. How do experts from outside the TSB, like us as a union, or manufacturers or airlines, fold into that process?
Yeah. So in Canada, it's a bit different than in the U.S. In the U.S., there is the party system that the NTSB uses. In Canada, we don't have an equivalent system. We will, of course, interact and collaborate with a number of stakeholders, including ALPA, including manufacturers, including operators, but usually will be on an as-needed basis.
Right, okay.
So, for instance, ALPA can help us provide fatigue analysis of pilot schedules. They can be there during TSB interviews as accompanying persons. Manufacturers will support the examination of certain parts, sometimes in their labs, because they are the best equipped to understand how their parts failed. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the parties that have a direct interest in the board's finding, they will get an early copy of the report and be able to comment on it. So that's also a way for us to have this interaction with whoever can have an interest in what we put in our reports.
Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Are there any common threads that your board finds in the investigations you perform, or recommendations that you find you're making frequently that need action?
I should mention that we are currently updating our watch list. The last one was issued in 2022, and the next one will be issued in the coming weeks. Some issues will stay on the watch list, some issues will be new, some will get removed. But all these common threads, usually we put them on the watch list. But I can give you two examples.
Okay.
One that is on the watch list and one that isn't, but that I like to discuss anyway because it is something that comes up often. The first one that is on the watch list is regulatory surveillance. So in Canada, it's the Department of Transport Canada, that is responsible for enforcing the Canadian aviation regulations. And we've had issues with regulatory surveillance in a significant portion of our investigations, delays related to the regulatory process, inconsistencies in enforcement between the regions, risk assessments, and difficulty bringing back operators into compliance. So these are all things that we've identified on the Transport Canada side,
Sure.
and we've issued recommendations. We probably have more than 10 active recommendations related to regulatory oversight, regulatory surveillance in Canada, to make sure that our regulator does the best job possible and fixes some of the gaps that we identified in how they conduct their work. The other one is northern operations and infrastructure in Canada. It's not an issue on our watch list, but it is an interesting one to discuss because we have a lot of northern airports in Canada. A lot of them don't have a lot of flights. They are mostly there to support the communities, but they are essential. But the infrastructure up there sometimes is very limited. The information about runway conditions is sometimes non-existent or very fragmented. The infrastructure to conduct approaches, again, sometimes is extremely limited for pilots that are often operating alone, or sometimes in very small teams, and that have a very high pressure to get the job done because these flights are essential for communities.
Yes.
It puts them in a tricky position because it adds to this added operational pressure, reduces the safety margins.
Yep.
And it does come up quite frequently in our investigations, all this northern operations part of aviation in Canada.
Yeah, that's certainly a unique threat because being mission-oriented and trying to support those, like you said, support those communities, the aviation is essential. So it's that added pressure to get the job done.
Exactly. And pilots, they do their best and they manage safety as they can, but there's always this pressure to get it done, to go and do the medevac. And
Yeah, absolutely. We preach that as you never hesitate that if you need to stop the operation, because obviously don't make a bad situation worse.
Yes.
In addition to aviation, the TSB reviews accidents and incidents across the entire industry, as you said, or across the entire transportation industry, as you said earlier. Is there any difference between the modes, or do other modes, are they more willing to enact your recommendations? Is there any difference there?
I would say that the aviation industry has a very strong safety culture compared to what we sometimes see in the other modes.
Okay.
They are many years in advance compared to some of the other modes that we investigate. And forums like this, the ALPA forum, is a great example of that. People getting together and discussing issues and the potential solutions to fix them. So this is a great example. And it's worth mentioning that a lot of elements related to safety culture have initially started in aviation and then moved to the other sectors. One example is CRM, Cockpit Resource Management, which is commonly used in the marine world now as a BRM, Bridge Resource Management, and it originated in aviation. But there are many examples of that. So that's the safety culture part of it. In terms of recommendations, adoptions, I'd say it's pretty consistent. Over the years, it's about 84% of the recommendations that we issued that were addressed as fully satisfactory. So it's a pretty good number. We're very happy with that. And it varies between the modes, but it's pretty consistent. There's no significant variation. So when we issue a recommendation, and we don't issue a lot of them, by the way, maybe one report out of 10 includes a recommendation. So when we issue a recommendation, it is because there is an issue that needs to be taken seriously.
Yes.
And usually it does generate action.
That's good. That's positive that you have that impact. All right, I got to ask about social media, right? I'm telling you, it's different now. It's different than almost it's ever been before. You've got this 24-hour news cycle, and everybody wants to speculate. Everybody's an expert. We saw that in the situation in Toronto as well as ours in D.C. earlier in the year. How does that affect your ability to handle these investigations with every expert out there on social media saying whatever they say?
I'd say it does not affect our methodology, because our methodology has been used and battle tested over the years. It's very solid. So we really try to stick with the methodology, but it does affect how we communicate. The occurrence in Toronto with the aircraft that turned upside down on landing is a great example of that, because you had all of this footage on social media, on Reddit, on X, a few minutes after the occurrence. And our investigators were not even on site yet. And there was already a ton of media analyzing what happened, what could be the cause of the occurrence and all that. So basically, we had to act real fast to set the record straight on some of this information, which is why we did like a 24-hour update, then a 48-hour update, and then a 30-day preliminary report to provide this factual information to try to reduce the amount of problematic information that circulated about this occurrence. The occurrence in St. Martin that happened earlier this week is another example of that. There's great footage of the aircraft landing and all of the emergency response and all that. It was a live stream on YouTube, so people saw the occurrence happen live. So we sent a team there. We are leading that investigation in St. Martin. And I have told my team that if they get a request for interviews, they should do the interviews to explain our process, explain what we have done so far and what is left to be done. Obviously, we can't speculate as to the causes, contributing factors, but we can say factually what we have done so far and what we still need to do. And that can help reduce some of the speculation that we see on social media. We usually know fairly early what happened in an occurrence. What takes longer is finding out why it happened. And this is the long part, and this is often why we get criticized, because it takes a long time to publish a final report. But finding out why something happened takes a long time, because we have to analyze each event, drill down. Sometimes we have to go back to the drawing board and do further analysis, listen to interviews again to be able to identify the underlying conditions between everything that happened, and then be able to draw findings and make recommendations that will have an impact. If we go too fast and we try to rush things, then our impact will be limited. So we really have to be able to identify where to focus our efforts. From our perspective, quality always trumps time. We try to streamline our processes and to avoid bottlenecks, but we want to get the best report out there possible.
Well, as a pilot on my 30th year in the industry, I appreciate that, because getting it right, if it takes a little longer, is essential, because we want to know that why did it happen. Don't just point fingers or jump to conclusions that, like we talked about with social media, the fact that everybody's an expert and they're all speculating, it's very tiring. So thank you for being deliberate and taking the time you need to absolutely get it right. Thank you for joining us today, Chair Murrier, for this interview and ALPA's Air Safety Forum. As an industry, we have learned a lot through detailed and independent investigations. And as pilots, we appreciate the professionalism that the TSB brings to every investigation. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Airline Pilot Podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. And if you enjoyed this episode, let your fellow crew members know about the show. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, reach out to podcast@alpa.org. To listen and subscribe to the Airline Pilot Podcast or learn more about ALPA, check us out online at alpa.org or find us on all major podcast platforms. Until next time, this is the Airline Pilot Podcast. Production copyright ALPA 2025, all rights reserved. Thanks and have a safe flight.